Medical disclaimer. All the content shown on the Harry Sopanos channel is created for information purposes only, based on personal opinions of the host. The channel contains health and medical related material or discussions based on the best research science that I'm aware of and my personal interpretation and understanding of the past or current research literature, and should not be viewed as medical advice. Any recommended dietary regime, supplement use, or dosing is based on my personal usage and opinion, and should not be viewed as medical advice or nutritional advice, and is for information purposes only. If you're considering applying any of this information, first seek professional advice before doing so. None of the research information or opinions presented are meant as medical advice or to be used to diagnose yourself. Always seek medical advice from a physician or other qualified health provider. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor, go to an emergency department, or call an ambulance immediately. The channel is not intended in any way as a diagnostic source for an acute condition. G'day guys. This is sort of part of a series on Senolytics. The first one will be on Fisetin, and we'll sort of look at some general information in regards to Fisetin, and also in regards to dosing that I sort of would recommend for myself. Obviously, this is not medical advice. People should, always seek out professional medical advice in regards to any supplementation that they do undertake. This is basically how I'm doing it, and my dad, and what I'm doing in terms of dealing with senescence amongst the people that are close to me anyway. So I'll go into some of the literature here, and I'll also go into some of the dosing and the reason why we do the dosing in a certain way and not another way, and the underlying purpose of using Senolytics in strategic ways and also different conditions. This will be a more general one. I have discussed it in the previous one in terms of cancer. I will look at a few things, but primarily it's focused on the dosing. It's just a quick overview, just as a reminder for people, a few things, and then we'll go to the dosing. Anyway, let me just share the screen. Let me just find the main. Yep. Okay, I found the main page, and this is just part of a general. This is done by King's College London, in the UK. Their school of basics and medical bioscience, and they're just doing a sort of a general overlook in terms of Senolytics and stuff like that. Increasing life expectancy of the world population has become an economic and global political health problem. Increasing life expectancy tracks with a high incidence of multiple chronic conditions, despite unprecedented advances in prevention, diagnostics, and treatment. I would sort of differ on some of that sort of stuff. In terms of prevention, there's bugger all, because we've got the dietary side completely wrong. In terms of diagnostics, yeah, our systems are getting better. In terms of treatment, it depends on what sort of ailment, how good it is, and how, if it's tied with a wrong sort of understanding of how the body works in terms of the lipid system and many other things, the treatments may not be appropriate, in my personal opinion, and that is not medical advice, it's just a personal opinion. Aging is the greatest risk factor for many life-threatening disorders, including cardiovascular disease, neurodegeneration, and cancer. I also beg to differ with that sort of statement. I think that is that is basically a statement that is based on conclusions of people living with chronic disease in a Western sort of setting with a modern dietary approach, not with a traditional ancestral approach. Take a look at ancestral societies. They usually basically are not frail. They are not basically, in chronic health sort of states. They usually live long lives if they're not killed by an animal or pick up some sort of bacterial infection from a cut or some other related activity because of their lifestyle, potentially warring over food resources or whatever else. In most cases, somebody in a tribal society will end up living a long life and then just dropping dead. So will not be living the last years of their life in a chronic state. So I disagree with that. That is because of modern foods that we are consuming that are causing far more cellular senescence and cellular damage. And we're using drugs to try and hold it all together. Yes, a lot of these drugs have some effectiveness. I can't deny that. But they derange the body in a number of different ways and then create other problems, which more drugs are then prescribed to sort of manage those additional problems that are created as a consequence of chasing one's tail and trying to keep somebody from dying, but maintaining them in a sickly, chronically ill, and sometimes demented state. I don't know what's worse, letting them basically just die in peace or basically keeping them alive in such a wretched state. That's for people to decide. That's their own personal choice in terms of how they would like to live their final years. I know how I would like to live my final years in the best health as possible, having good, healthy lifespan rather than necessarily lifespan in general. I mean, somebody can keep you going. If you're demented and you don't even know yourself, do you really want to? I wouldn't personally, but that's my personal opinion on that matter. It's not for, everybody can have their personal opinion in regards to that. So, age in all tissues associated with increased cellular senescence. That I agree completely. That we do notice some level of senescence. Even in tribal societies, you will get some level of senescence. The difference is the period of senescence usually happens very close to death. That means they have a long health span, and then as cell division starts falling off, you get more and more cells going into a state of senescence and dysfunction very rapidly. And usually these people will die very rapidly without going through a chronic period. So the difference is the timing. So for people on an inflammatory diet, they usually basically are undergoing a much more gradual increase in senescence and reduction in health span. While tribal populations or those on ancestral diets usually maintain good health span, and then towards the end, they rapidly deteriorate and die. So, and that's what we all want to do. We want to basically get to a point where no more cell division can take place. When you have, because when you can't get more cell division, most of your cells become senescent and dysfunctional. So we just want to get to that point and then have massive senescence right at the end and then just die because of no more cell division. So senescence is part of the aging process, but the question is, how much do we want that to be? At the end, once you get to your level of cell division, well, that's it. Adios, amigo, so to speak. Now, Obviously, getting rid of senescent cells is a good thing because you can actually encourage the body to produce new healthy cells. But at the end of the day, you have to remember this is a fundamental thing that I'll just point out here. At the end of the day, there's only so much cell divisions that can take place. Now, the other thing that actually will increase your thyroid function to, usually say, you want it high, very high, that ages you faster. That's what happens on a glucose diet. So you will generate much quicker senescence. You will age yourself faster because you're actually running at this higher tempo. You don't want that. Most people that are longevity, when they look at centenarians, they have a much lower TSH, a higher reverse T3, and a lower T3. They are running at this much lower level, cruising along. I call it cruise mode, rather than at this rapid mode. That may be fine when you're young. When you get old, you want to be in that cruise mode. So things that get you in that cruise mode are things like more low carbohydrate diets. Fasting does increase that even more, but you can't chronically fast forever. That's unhealthy, and it will create a lot of damage to your body. So there is always a sweet spot with these things. And it seems that a carnivore diet has that sweet spot. It furnishes the body with enough material to maintain the body in terms of good levels of protein, but at the same time, it keeps the insulin to glucagon ratio lower. It actually keeps also even reverse T3, not as low as keto diets, as, really low keto diets. It keeps it in a much sweeter spot, further away from the state that you would get with, fasting or that. So it's far less catabolic. And that's why on an ancestral diet, even what Mary saw with the Maasai, who she basically did keto, pricking their finger for ketones, and they had that low grade ketone levels and low of normal levels in terms of blood sugar. They're in that really perfect sweet spot, and that's where we want to be. We want to be in that really perfect sweet spot. And that's what an ancestral carnivore diet gives you. We don't want a chronic ketosis. We're not chasing ketones. We don't want that chronic ketosis, but we want that low grade. So we're kept in that really nice sweet spot without too catabolic, and we just swing in and out at that low grade, which is just perfect. And it's also less stressful on the body as well. And that's the advantage of an ancestral diet, which is higher in animal products, in particular animal protein. And you see that with Maasai living over 100, and you see that amongst the Inuits as well, who never had a word for cancer or cardiovascular disease. So just wanted to cover that little point as important. Obviously, the diet that they are on is non-Randall cycle activated state. So they never really activate the Randall cycle for their whole life. That is why they're in that really sweet spot. Anyway, let's move on. So a stress response process where damaged cells exit the cell cycle permanently and produce a pro-inflammatory senescent associated secretory phenotype. That means they basically secrete cytokines. They do also upregulate. There's a lot of other things that happen. They upregulate CD38, which basically degrades NAD+, which lowers the energy capacity for your body then to heal itself because it doesn't have enough energy, So it's sort of one compounds the other. Then inflammatory cytokines can actually go into neighboring cells and actually cause damage to them and force them into senescence. And it sort of cascades over time, degrading cells around, making them more vulnerable for cancer, plus at the same time increasing the sort of the CD38, which is a protective mechanism to prevent them going rogue into cancer. But at the same time, it can only do so much. When you've got overwhelming damage, eventually you will get things like that happening. Shit happens, so to speak. But at the same time, it's degrading the energy that you really need to fix the problem. So it's a catch-22. It's basically, you know, a really bad state to be in. So we don't want to, at the same time, this is why I'm against precursors like NMN, high dosing of niacin or high dosing of NR, or using these sort of precursors, these NAD precursors. And the reason for that is quite clear, that when you've got potentially cells that are moving into a cancerous state or whatever, you don't want to be basically having high sirtuins and high PARPs, because they will basically put cancer into hyperdrive. So normally they would be really health promoting and longevity, but they also, in a cancer state, they can also really help the cancer cells. This is why resveratrol and all these sort of things are very dangerous, I find, shouldn't be used, and many people use them very inappropriately. So there is a time and a place for all these sort of things. You could sort of use it in the early stages of certain things of cancer. At a later stage, best not to use. So it is also, with these sort of things, senolytics on the other hand, you can use them before cancer, in metastasis, or post-cancer. You can use them at any stage, but there are issues with them associated as well. And I will go into that sort of stage, the reason for it. As Professor James Kirkland and his team at the Mayo Clinic pioneered a new class of agents which eliminated senescent cells named senolytics, from the word senescence and lytic. Lytic, they call it the destroying, but it's actually pulling apart. It's a Greek word that means basically pulling apart, sort of dismembering or whatever is what it actually really means. Anyway, that's the Greek language lesson for the day. Through exploiting senescent cell dependence on specific pro-survival pathways. Okay, so this is important. Okay, senescent transiently disable senolytics, disable the pro-survival network, and that defends senescent cells against their own apoptotic environment without affecting proliferation or quiescent, which is sort of a state of being in kumbaya, sort of what do they call it? I think now, sort of in a dormant state. That's it. God. Differentiated cells. Okay, so pretty much senolytics really push the apoptotic button on these senescent cells, which is a good thing. But at the same time, these pro-survival networks are affected primarily in the senescent cells, but they are affected in the system to some extent, very low grade. And that's why I don't believe that you should basically be on senolytics continuously. It's not a good thing. Okay, there is a way to do it, and I'll explain later on why and how. Anyway, they usually say the flavonoids present in fruits and vegetables, very little, let's put it that way. And they've actually looked at a couple of studies here. This is on with quercetin. Quercetin is also, I mean, I've been promoting quercetin as an ionophore for zinc, to get zinc, which has positive ion, which basically can't get through the receptor. So it needs to basically, piggyback on quercetin to get through into the cell through that receptor. And so basically it's an ionophore, which can be quite helpful in that regard. but also it's a senolytic as well. So we'll actually look at some of the effects as well in this regard. Finally, circulating. So in regards to, and just reminder, senescence associated secretory phenotypes, which is the sort of cytokines that come out of them. Okay. Final key circulating SASP factors, that's what I'll call them. Interleukin 1A, 2, 6, and 9, and can't be lowered 11 days, and matrix metalloproteinases. So, and these are the big ones, I've always said. 2 and 9 are the big ones. 12 is another one, an important one, but 2 and 9 are, you know, skin and a whole lot of other things in a lot of different organs, your lungs, and yeah, quite a few organs around the body. So, which is the collagen degrading enzymes, and which are actually produced in the liver. And the good thing is they were significantly lower 11 days after than before the 3 days of the actual treatment. So this is a good thing about senolytics, that it also has an effect on, you know, cytokines. It also has an effect on, you know, independently of the regulatory effects of, you know, the fat soluble vitamins, which is basically retinol, vitamin D, and MK4, our favorite K2 fat soluble vitamin. It's menaquinone type. That basically, those three are the key, some of the key regulatories on this sort of thing, on matrix metalloproteinase, the collagen degrading enzymes. So they sort of keep them under control. They regulate them and prevent them from overexpressing in the liver. This, independently of those fat soluble vitamins, is actually lowering it. So senolytics, especially quercetin, does have a lowering effect on matrix metalloproteinases. Really interesting, especially if you've got diseases where you've got a lot of sort of you know, collagen related health issues from too much matrix metalloproteinases, or too many issues on like skin related issues and stuff like that. Quercetin could be a very good senolytic to use in this regard. Okay, but again, it's on, off, on, off. So I prefer basically getting on them at high doses for 5 days and then off them or stuff like that. So very much like the other stuff, and I'll explain further down. Anyway, let's minimize this. Fisetin, the key one that I'm actually going to be discussing today is basically, this is prospective in regards to the anti-cancer sort of properties. And so it has an effect on all these organ systems, you know, directly. Mechanism of Fisetin against cancer cells in all these different, that's pancreas, obviously your lungs and stuff like that. That's not sure what trying to remember what that is. Anyway, that's your reproductive system, more or less, your gut, your liver, very important organ. I know, yeah, I can't think of it at the moment. Anyway, so obviously colon, people with colon cancer. As you can see, it also has an effect on MMPs 9 in this case, and I suspect on the other. They seem all to have an effect on, you know, in regards to the matrix metalloproteinases as well, independent from the fat soluble vitamins, which is really interesting in that regard. So these are all the different organs that they've actually looked at this. I'll put it up, people can look at it. Bladder, ovarian, cervical, skin, you know, you name it. It has some good apoptotic abilities in that regard. Okay, further down here. Where is it? Okay, yes, right here. That's the part that I was interested. So in regards to this one, Fisetin actually is quite good in this regard. It's affecting nearly pretty much all the actual matrix metalloproteinases and has an effect on all these inflammatory. We're talking about a lot of the interleukin, TNF alpha, all the big ones, that we can think, COX-2, you name it. A lot of these sort of related inflammation areas, which is really, I'm not going to go into the apoptosis and, part and stuff like that and a whole lot of things. That's for another day, another subject. But when we're looking at these collagen degrading stuff, and when we're looking at, pathological conditions, tumor initiation that affects all these pathways, we're talking about it really goes after all the associated pathways, which is really good in that regard. Anyway, this one basically, Fisetin induces autophagy in pancreatic cancer cells via endoplasmic reticulum stress and mitochondrial stress-dependent pathways. Basically here, we're looking at the control, Fisetin, these are different doses, okay? So we've got the different doses. And as we see the higher doses and over how many hours, so that's, okay, concentrations, 24 hours and 48 hours. So obviously the control, no difference. 25 hours, there we can see a bit of reduction in that, so in that regard, far more at the 48 hours between at that dose. And so at the doubling that dose, there's not much difference. This is important. I'll come to that at a later point. Another study, the next one, So when you're actually basically going for the high, like this higher dose, you can see a more significant effect after 48 hours. At even a higher dose, doubling that, you're basically getting to the stage where you're actually really starting to affect. And at one of the much higher doses, you can see quite a lot of reduction. That's the control. And as you can see, the different levels of reduction. So, we're getting rid of these cancers, but basically we're knocking them off. We're forcing them into an apoptotic state, Anyway, oops. There's more information there if people want to look at the cell lines and also the different RNA sequences and the differences between control and Fisetin. You can actually see on all these different markers quite a bit of an effect. The other ones are actually a list of all the genes. That's if people want to really go through and look at them. Good luck to you. If you want to spend a few hours, you can use the Snippedia, remember, and go and check each one of the genes if that takes your fancy. It's up to you. Yeah. And basically, there's the control, and these are the reductions in the in the viability of these of tumors. Okay. So anyway, this one here was on leukemia, and this is why I want to actually talk about doses. Really, really, really important. Okay, and the way you will take the doses as well. Okay, now they actually then here all through some markers of the cell deaths were significantly elevated in response to Fisetin treatment. These were counterbalanced
through anti-apoptotic and pro-survival signals. That's why you need the high doses, to lower those anti-apoptotic and pro-survival signals. They are there to prevent, because you don't want to be in this chronic state of apoptosis, okay? It's not a good thing to be for all the cells. So we want to take out the damaged cells, the cancer cells, but we don't want to cause too much derangement in the body. That's why it's short and sharp, short and sharp. And so don't listen to idiots that talk about taking it continuously for days and days and years, this sort of stuff. With decreasing concentrations of Fisetin and arsenic trioxide. So basically so the whole of the findings of this study suggests that careful consideration should be taken to advise cancer patients to take Fisetin as a dietary supplement when considering Fisetin as a potential candidate. Well, you know what, guys? You didn't use high doses. You used very low doses. So, doesn't surprise me, the results. We saw from the previous study, those lowered doses weren't really doing it. They had a bit of an effect, but not much. It's only when we pushed the high doses that we got that dramatic change and drop in senescent cells that were, or the amount of cancer cells that were, being taken out. So very important dosing. Okay, and here's another example of the same thing. As you can see, as you go from the control to the higher doses, there is cell proliferation is really reduced. That's what we want in a cancer state, in particular those people who've got cancer of wound areas. We reduce the wound areas. So even people that have got damaged areas, we can actually take them out with Senolytics. So we can remove damaged stuff in different areas, in different tissues. So combine this with Cerule, you'll probably get faster results. So, a number of invasion cells. So the number of invasion cells that are invading adjoining tissue are actually going quite down. As you can see, the dose counts. Small doses have some effect, but not a large effect. High doses have more pronounced effects. This is important, guys. You've got to go for the high doses. Anyway, let's go. This was Fisetin inhibits growth and metastasis. This is very important because it covers both the growth and the metastatic state as cancer progresses, of triple negative breast cancer by reversing epithelials to blah, 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 pathway. Okay. So that was the previous one that I just showed. That was that one. And you can see the sort of changes. Very different. Because they're all fluorescent. You can see the state control changes. People can check all these things out at their heart content. Anyway, so now just wanted to bring this up. So the sort of tissues that we're looking at, these are the sort of pathways. So if you see here, we've got mTOR affecting it. It does inhibit mTOR. So you've got to be very careful. Chronically inhibiting mTOR is not a good thing. You will break down tissue. It's not a good thing, okay? We don't want to, that's why we don't want to do it continuously. It can be harmful to our own, we'll start breaking down our tissue. We won't be able to maintain good cellular health. Just having a whole lot of cells that that are or taking out all the senescent cells and having a whole lot of healthy cells, but are degraded in some way, that not functioning properly, is not a healthy state of affairs. So there is you got to be very careful, but it does have an effect. And as you can see in all this tissue, a number of, the inflammatory things are being directly melanoma, prostate cancer, lung cancer, cervical cancer, leukemia, breast cancer, bladder cancer, so and colorectal cancer. So it covers quite a few. It is really good at taking out cancer cells all over the body, practically, in that regard. So how do we get it? Can we get it in foods? Well, pretty much it's very low in all these foods. It is a flavonoid after all. Tomatoes have got basically, cucumbers have got basically, some of the fruit like peaches, onions and all that. Fuck all. Apples are a bit better, but strawberries are the only one that actually has any decent amount. But this is just too low. Way too low. We're talking about micrograms. That's when you see that mg, that's the Greek m, which means micrograms. So it's also shown as mcg. You'll see it many times if you Google it. That's what it comes up with. They don't use the sort of the mathematical method, which is based on the Greek. So you have to think it's about 1,000 times for a milligram. And we are using things like 500 milligrams a day. So you're pushing shit uphill if you think you can get it from food. Not going to happen. Obviously, if you're on an ancestral diet for all your life, you don't need it, because basically you would be healthy. You wouldn't basically be creating a whole lot of senescent cells. You would be going right through the life, and towards the end, when there was less cell division possible, you would get rapidly quite a bit of senescence, and then you would just drop dead. That's how humans lived, and most animals live, until they get to a point and then they perish. But humans decided we're going to change our diet. We're not going to eat species appropriate. We're going to eat man-made shit. Yes. And then we became chronically sick. And the rest is history, as every one of you know. So let's say we were to basically try and get 500 at 1,000. Okay, so that is 500,000 micrograms. Divide that by 160. We're not even going to look at apples. You would have to eat 3.125 kilograms of strawberries. That's quite a bit. Let's put it that way. And very expensive as well. So why would you bother, let alone all the fructose and everything else associated with it? Not a good idea, and let's just, for argument's sake, okay, we'll say, because that's in grams, so obviously grams 1,000, so there's your kilos. Now we'll go back to the grams, and we'll divide that by 28.33 to get the ounces. And that is 110 ounces. And to get pounds, we'll divide that by 16. And that is 6.9 pounds. Have fun trying to get your dosage. You'd have to be doing total per 5 days. Would be something like 34.5 pounds of strawberries. Very expensive supplement, might I say, let alone all the fructose associated with it. And yes, I don't think we're going to do that, are we? 3.125 times 5 would be 15.6 kilograms. I'm not doing that. So that was more for comedy purposes. In regards to that, you know, you got to have a bit of fun, you know. What do you expect me to be telling you that it's these are great sources? That's what the veg tarts would say. Yes, only those misanthropists who think you can get everything from a nutrient devoid plant. Okay, now what are the doses? So I would say there's a number of ways of actually that approach. My sort of protocol is, and this is based on research of, you know, some clinical studies that have been done. I did show some of that stuff last time when I was doing the cancer one, but I've got my own take on it. They were using 500 milligrams, some of the better studies. So mine is basically 500 milligrams, and I do it every month at the beginning of the month. It's very easy to lose track of time. So don't do it in the middle of the month and try and remember what day did I do it in the beginning of the month. Forget it. I said to Dad, simple. At the beginning of the first of the month, second of the month, third, fourth, and fifth of the month, only those days will you take 500 milligrams, and then nothing for the rest of the month. I want to restore back the protective systems in your system, and at the same time, I want to restore your mTOR so you can still build muscles, you can still build your body and all that. And I also said to him, do not do any exercise, no weightlifting, none of that. No. When we're impeding mTOR, we do not want to do any weightlifting of any sort. So it was quite clear. And I did tell him to basically do a more high fat day and a slightly lower in terms of protein for that day. So that was quite clear, more fat, less protein. And there's a reason for that as well. The bioabsorption of Fisetin actually is increased with more fat. So if you actually just take it as a supplement without fat, your bioabsorption can be very low. So I've told him, you know, I want you to basically use cream, really thick cream, shitloads of it, which is we've got one here that's about 48% of it for 100 is basically just fat. And I said, I want you to use very fatty cream, and I want you to consume it with that. And he said, how much? I said, as much as you can tolerate. He looked at me, gave me the funny look, said, what the fuck, you know? So he gave me one of those sort of dad looks. Are you serious, son? And I said, yeah, Dad. Yeah. And he goes, oh, okay. I know you're pretty good. You've turned my life around, so I trust you. I go, that's good to hear, Dad. So yes, we had one of those funny dad son conversations. Anyway, but really important because of the inhibitory effect. I don't want you eating too much protein on that day, especially when you're taking it. I want you to be consuming way more fat. I want you to increase the bioabsorption of the Fisetin. That's what I want. I want really to go in there and just go whack, you know, the Fisetin, and just say, you're a senescent cell, I'm going to take you out, you know. So no, won't be taking prisoners. We'll be wiping all senescent cells out. So we want basically complete and utter elimination of as much as we can on the day-to-day basis. So now always remember, 5 days, no more. We do not basically want to create conditions of accelerated tissue breakdown. Okay, we do not basically, we don't want to be inhibiting mTOR for too long. Not a good and healthy thing. So we basically want to 5 days. Okay, so because even in a faster state, you do not inhibit mTOR as much as these do, because you still basically come out of autophagy and you're actually releasing some, when you go through apoptosis, you'll actually actually there'll be a lot of dead, cells and amino acids available that will, from those cells that were taken out, and that will go into the bloodstream. And usually that's the time when you cycle through in and out of autophagy when you're fasting. Well, the whole reason why I don't want mTOR activate, because you're inhibiting mTOR activation to very much lower level, and we're actually putting out some proteins into the bloodstream and stuff like that. The last thing I want to do is add even more protein, which the body can't really use and all that. So it's more of a, like you could say you could do like a low grade sort of fasting or fasting mimicking type approach, and it's basically just you're doing it basically with a lot of fat. So you'll probably get a bit more ketones out of it on that day. Fair enough. That's what extra energy, which is good. Probably what you need as well. Much better to be in a ketotic state when you're doing this rather than a glycolytic state. So, be a fat burner rather than a carb burner in this sort of state, because you're basically also muscle sparing, which is really important, especially if you're inhibiting mTOR. So it's best to be, if you're doing this, best to be in a more low carbohydrate, more sort of that sort of state. Okay, so that's one very important point. So my protocol is 5 days at the beginning of every month. Okay, and that is for people who have got things like cancer, really bad conditions. You do that for an entire year. Okay, and then you give a rest for about 3 months, and then you do it for another period of time. And I'm actually seeking to find companies around the world, and I will report later on, where you can actually do like tests to see the level of senescence drops and stuff like that. But now, for the general population that doesn't have cancer or stuff like that, I recommend a different approach. I recommend you do it basically at the beginning of the year, the first 3 months, you do this protocol. So January, February, March, gotcha. Then for, you don't do it for 3 months at all. And then in the following, which is 7th, so July, August, September, you do it again for 3 months, and then you don't do it for October, November, December. So you're actually doing it out. So 3 months, no 3 months, 3 months, no 3 months sort of thing. And it also, it's the other reason for that is also that usually, because Easter comes into that and sort of Christmas in the other one, and that's sort of the way I've positioned it to sort of not fall into Easter or into Christmas or stuff like that. And that's the reason why I've done it in that sort of format. Could be other months. If you don't celebrate those things, you can do it in other month combinations. But I want you to do it in 3 off, 3 on, 3 off, 3 on, 3 off, 3 on type approach. Okay. It's people that are, do not need to do that sort of thing. People that are basically in a sort of with cancer and all that, they're already going to be in a very ketogenic state. They are going to be in a very much lower mTOR state. They are not trying to build muscle. They're not basically out there muscle building or anything like that. They are basically out there trying to survive. And so they need to take out more of these senescent cells over the year. Then go and check. And if they basically go into remission, then go into the 3-3-3-3 like everyone else. For 1 year, I don't have a problem. For multiple years, continuous, I'm a bit wary. It's the old thing. If it's too good to be true, it is. So I'm always a bit wary. Yes, it does have this, but when it comes to the mTOR, the cell protective mechanisms and all that, I'm always, wary about that, not pushing the envelope too much. It's like Icarus getting too close to the sun. Don't be an Icarus, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you. More isn't better necessarily. You've got to be smart and strategic about that and incorporate a number of positive things in your repertoire of your lifestyle. So I hope that has provided some information of how to do it and all that. So give it a try. I will provide some information in that regard. Now, let me just... I'll sort of... So let me just find this. I'll find it first in my account before I don't want people knowing what my account is and stuff like that for a sec, but I'll find it and then I'll log out. Just give me a sec. There are some vegetarians that may view this. There's always nasty people you've got to be protective of, unfortunately, in this world, even though you're trying to help people. Yes. Now let me just log out. Done. Okay. Now let me just share that. So that's one of the brands you can actually utilize in a sense. So that's one option, and the other one, let me just find it. Give me a sec. So this one basically comes at 100 milligrams. So you'd have to take like, because 5, you'd have to take, it's 30 capsules. So if you're looking at this sort of stuff, it is a good brand. It's the one that I've actually got. And it's fairly clean, cellulose, modified cellulose vegetable capsule. It's got nothing else. It's just the capsule and the Fisetin inside of it. It's got no other fillers, no other stuff, which is pretty good brand in that regard. So it's a fairly good option in that regard. So now let me just find the other one. Senescence. I think this brand is only available in the UK. You may be able to find on another site. Look, I don't really know, but so that one there's got 30 capsules and all that. This one here is basically Fisetin high strength, 500 milligrams, 365 capsules. So it is a fairly good price. And that's the same, it's the same basically, vegetable cellulose, vegetable capsule cells, nothing else. It's fairly clean. It's a really good price. So if you're in the UK or you can access UK stuff, so yeah, so that's the one to probably go for in that regard, because you're getting more bang for your bucks. So at 500 milligrams, you know, you're basically looking at the dosages there. So you're doing it for 6 months, 3 on, 3 off, 3 on, 3 off. So, and you're doing 5 every 5 every 6 months, because these are 500 milligrams, 5 times the other, that's 30. So 365 30, you're looking at basically 12 years of supplements there in terms of the way I recommend taking them, so quite a bit. But unfortunately, some idiots are going to be taking them on a daily basis, which isn't going to be very good for them long term if they do that. They're going to cause themselves all sorts of other health problems. But in regards to that, you could basically, if you've got 4 members of 4 family members, as an example, there's 3 years of supplementation for 4 family members, or 3 family members, like an elderly mother or father, and yourself and your partner, you're pretty much for 4 years supply. And I suspect when it comes to the Amazon UK, other people will also be able to access, from certain, probably, from Ireland as well. I don't know about other parts of the EU, whether this is available or not. The Vita Plus, I've got no idea. You'd have to do a search and find out. I'm just going to provide these 2 links, and people can basically go and try and find them. And good luck to you, basically, is my sort of thing. At the end of the day, as I said, be sensible the way you do this sort of stuff. I hope this information was informative. It's not meant as medical advice. At the end of the day, you should always discuss any medication and supplementation you take with your physician, just in case there is issues with it interacting inappropriately. So always do that. I have shown past information on this in my cancer one that I did, in terms of that it has actually chemoprotective, or actually improves the effects of chemotherapy. It actually enhances them. These, especially Fisetin, as one of the Senolytics, it actually enhances it and actually prevents resistance. So it's the problem is oncologists are unaware of it. You can bring these studies to your oncologist. I will provide the links. Take them, let them read them. If you've got an oncologist, and basically get them up to date, and then consider appropriate dosing when you're doing chemotherapy as well. Because when it comes to the chemotherapy side, I'm not really up to date, and I don't know all the chemotherapeutic drugs interactions and stuff like that, and I'm not prepared to go down that pathway. you got to speak with your oncologist if you've got this sort of situation and provide that information and get them to look into it. You know, at the end of the day, they are working for you in a sense, and they should be. Let's put it that way, fundamentally. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this information about Fisetin as a potent senolytic. There will be more in future videos on senolytics and other categories and how to use them and stuff like that. This wasn't on Fisetin. It was a request by one of my subscribers, so I sort of brought it forward to today. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. See yous.